Hey everybody, this is Sally Griffin, aka Millionaire Yogi, and I help visionaries become New Earth influencers. And today the conversation is all about New Earth business and how can you shift yourself into the New Earth way of thinking. So I think that the first part of that is to really go through what is New Earth and what is the understanding that we have that we're stepping into a whole new realm of being, and that business, if it wants to flourish in a new way, needs to have some principles behind it. So let's talk about New Earth. My whole world has been operating on a spiritual level since I was since I was born. I was born awake. I didn't have an awakening like some people talk about. There was a crisis point in their life, and that was the moment that they awakened to the new earth. I was one of the people who came in who's described as a forerunner to indigos or to crystal children, and was a part of a group of souls, let's say, who came in to advance earth thinking and the ways of operating slightly before its time. So my experience always was, not quite fitting in. That's a big conversation that people feel who are, crystal children or indigos. I also had that experience. It didn't matter where I went or if I was even in my local neighborhood. There was a piece of the jigsaw puzzle which is not fitting in. And always having these ideas which seemingly were ahead of their time. And I wonder if you relate to that, if anybody relates to that. And the things that we talk about with New Earth are often based on spiritual systems which are predating this time, which come from a different time, and then using some of the advanced technologies now to marry those together, ancient wisdom with tech. And so I'll give you a good example of it. We talk about organic food being a fantastic option. And there was a time when nobody used pesticides or chemical fertilizers on their land or on their food. And so everything was by nature organic. But what happened in the 1950s was this was the big rise of the mass crops and, mass industrial farming. And so farmers were then paid to use chemical fertilizer. They were used to spray poisons on the land, things like Roundup. And I'm sure you all know about the notorious Monsanto, like the king of poison companies, this massive corporation who were using payouts for farmers. And farmers by nature are often quite poor. They work on the land. So they would take these payouts and use these chemical fertilizers. My father, interestingly enough, who has had a hobby farm doing rare breeds for 40 years, he's also an environmentalist, and he did a test spray zone, small test spray zone of Roundup, never used Roundup, on his land to see the effects of it. And nothing has ever grown there ever since. It's used as weed killer, this kind of thing. And he just said it's extraordinary. It's like barren wasteland after you've used Roundup. So imagine that was going on your food, and farmers were being paid to do that. And so roll on when we come forward into the New Earth way of thinking, and we realize that organic food is the way to go. What we're doing is we're now saying to people, hey, go organic. But the absurdity of it is that they always were organic. They always were before chemical fertilizers. And you can imagine there's been like an interruption on many levels of ways of thinking to introduce, say, a poison, or to introduce a problem, to introduce a not flowing way of communication. And then that's what we've grown up with as normal. And now we're reverting to a previous time and adding in digital tech. That in a nutshell is New Earth. And so anybody who's having the conversation about sustainability, eco, in event planning, which is something I'm very involved in, digital online events, one of the things that's so great is there's zero waste, you know, and event production just in our lifetime has always been, it includes mass waste being expected to be part of the scene. And then all of a sudden now we are bringing in all of these, you know, no plastic, big cleanup, sustainability, eco recycling, all the rest of it. And so we're going to a time pre-plastic. You know, when I grew up, which was in the 70s, there were no plastic bottles. It was all glass. And then the plastic arrived en masse, like, you know, super en masse. When I was going to India, late 80s, all of a sudden, my first trip, there were no plastic bottles. My second trip, it inundated with plastic bottles. Like when they arrived, my God, they arrived. And India had always been this wonderful country where they ate on banana leaves and they swept up after themselves, you know, every morning. Some of the most extremely poor people on the planet in India had jobs to clean the streets, you know, ladies who would sweep with these bamboo brooms, and they would clear up all the rubbish, and there was hardly any because it was all organic food material that would just decompose naturally. That was the first time I went, which was probably 28 years ago. The second time I went, plastic had arrived, and I was in Nepal trekking up into the Himalayas, and I just remember thinking, oh my God, like I could see the piles about 20, maybe it was 26 years ago for the second trip, of just plastic bottles being piled up. And I was aware, even at that time, what are we going to do about this? So roll on. Now we are in a space where this New Earth conversation is now taking form, because we're actually entering the period of time astrologically when we're stepping into New Earth. So I was born in the 60s, and at that time, I'm sure all of you guys will know the song, you know, The Age of Aquarius. This is the dawning of the age of Aquarius, that one. And it was because there was a very popular theater production of Hair, and a movie actually went out much later. But that song swept the radio stations when I was growing up. And I remember thinking, we're in the age of Aquarius, and I'm an Aquarian, so woo, you know, I had this understanding as a teenager. And actually, what was the misinterpretation was that no, this was the harbinger of the age of Aquarius. So I was too young to be one of those hippies in that way. The hippies of the 60s, I was too young for. But I was born in the 60s, so I was aware of the flavor of that revolution that was happening. And everybody would talk about the age of Aquarius. And really what had happened in the 60s when I was born, literally when I was born, I have 6 planets in Aquarius in my astrological sign chart. And that means that when I was born, you looked up at the sky, 6 planets were lined up in the constellation of Aquarius. And that is pretty major. It's like a big symbol of a shift that's going on, like Aquarius is coming into being. Somebody I know who was born 2 weeks earlier than me has 7 planets in Aquarius. And if you know anything about astrology, you'll know that that's a pretty unusual sign to have that many in Aquarius. So roll on, me, the daughter of Aquarius, grows up thinking that we're already being influenced heavily by Aquarius. And you can see that the revolution that happened in the 60s, all the things that kicked off, you know, Black rights movement, feminine rights movement, you know, justice, a big piece of justice, which is very Aquarian conversation, sustainable communities, all the hippie communities living together and how to live off the land was kicking off. But that was just the harbinger of it, which means it was like the foreteller, the forerunner of something that was going to happen much later. And actually, we are now in 2020. And from my understanding, Kai Pacha, the wonderful astrologer, he's a friend of mine, and he's talked about how, you know, for our generation, he's a little older than me, but as we run into new earth, this is his description, it's hilarious. We run in and then we die, because we are just going to be here for the beginning of it. We're actually, the souls who are incarnate right now to help it happen are, we're never going to live into it. We're never going to see the full benefits of the whole of that experience. In my belief system, which is very yogi, you know, it says it in the name, millionaire yogi, I believe in many lives. And so I believe this is one chapter in a series of many lives that I'll have. And so I will see it, but not physically this time round. So what does that mean for all of us? In 2020, at the winter solstice, there is going to be what we call the Mayan calendar. So we've always been going on the traditional calendar, the Georgian calendar. Really, it lines up with the Mayan calendar that we shift into the age of Aquarius. And so it's actually quite recent. And with COVID, and you can see these signs, and there were always the indications that big, potent changes were going to take place for humanity. And some of it, like birthing in the new earth, which is the conversation that we're having here, birthing in the new earth. What happens when a new era is birthed in is you'll see the old era, the old structures going down, and some of them will not be very pleasant. So what we're looking at is the patriarchal era, which is very dominated by white, Christian, I would say the three main religions, old school religions, who gain their authority because they say we have a book. This is the big key thing. We have a book, therefore it must be true. This is Christianity translated. You're not reading Yeshua's writings. You're not reading what Yeshua, the healer, the master healer, wrote. You're reading translations. Same with Islam, same with Orthodox Judaism. Those are the three big ones, and they're all patriarchal. Massive control is the form of it, because it was 2,000 years of patriarchy in its sense. What we were learning as humanity, where we were learning systems of control. And so with all of them, if you look at the history of that, you'll see the history of sexual shame comes in with all those religions. Sexuality is considered dirty. Women, because they are under the rule of men, often not given the right of education, the right of power, the right of money. In fact, women are property. They're considered property, just like slaves were. And in fact, when you look all the way back to Greek and Roman times, which was, you know, the beginning and the flourishing of the patriarchy, you basically see that women have no vote. Well, neither do slaves. So women are considered the same. That in Greek times, you would have a wife for property lineage, but actually, to show your prowess as a man, you'd have a male lover who was considered the favored experience, actually. And women were considered, way down on the horizon of entities who had the ability to think, to reason. That was the whole thing. Like, women didn't even have reason. So you can see we've had this bulk history that's gone on. And I want to speak into that because we've got the dregs of the end of a patriarchal era. And some of that is the ugliest form. So you can think about the military. You can think about corporate business, how everything is about the 1% who hold all the money of the world, these billionaires and trillionaires who have ultimate power over all the world. and the systems in place that are so corrupt, such as the banking system, such as corporate business. And we expect that to be what we look up to, and we expect it to be the thing that is the right way, and it's the system. We talk about the system. So, you know, speaking as somebody who is a harbinger of the Aquarian age, and, you know, I'm a high priestess of Wicca, so I teach people to how to become priests and priestesses of the ancient pathways. And anything to do with control, anything that is not questioned, anything that you do not favor women in, to me is not working, right? And in Wicca, we really have this partnership of the masculine and the feminine. It's the divine masculine, divine feminine. Men have to be part of the picture. So it's not throwing men out at all. It's seeing the different ways that power can be. I think I have a cat hair here. And the way that it works in Wicca is the high priestess is always the one that, if you like, governs the group or the coven in our structure. And the men push her forward to be like, they're the support system, and they provide the strength and the unanimous kind of energy for her to step forward and give power to various different things, such as transformation, such as healing, such as the magic that would go on. So how does this influence all the way that I think about New Earth business? Well, firstly, we start to look at the history. We have to look at the history in order to move away from it. And an example, when we're looking at the birthing of New Earth, which is the context of this conversation, birth in itself, when it was a natural process governed by women, by female midwives who would be part of the birthing process, who would have the herbal lore, who would have all the teaching that would help women give birth. They were the ones who at that time were considered you would consult them first. Birth was in the hands of women. No shit. Like, surprise, surprise. Women are the ones who get pregnant, who have big bellies, who have to give birth to those babies. So of course, birth was women's knowledge zone of genius. And guess how women used to naturally, just like animals, give birth? They squat. They find quiet space. They go into their own sort of space and they give birth squatting. And so roll on. We had a period in which Christianity, which is not Yeshua the teacher, and Magdalene, who is his consort, divine masculine, divine feminine. Now we've moved to 300 years after Christianity has happened. And we've got now just a series of translations. There is a synod, which was an agreed group of church elders, all of whom were white male elders. And they come together in 300 AD, after Jesus is dead. And they come up with this new agreement. First of all translations, they're going to remove all mention of women. This is a fact. The next piece is some of the earliest propaganda that you'll see. In order for Christianity to develop and progress and conquer, then what it has to make everything else as wrong, like everything else that is not Christianity is wrong. So it names everything outside of itself pagan, which actually means rustic. It just means people of the land. Heathen, which means men of the heaths. It named everything else the devil. The devil doesn't exist except in Christianity. In pagan religions or spiritual paths, there is a horned fertility god, often known as Pan or Bacchus, who's this wildly fertile god. He has an erection. He's sexual. He's of nature. He's made of the plants and the energy of life itself. And he's wild and he dances. And the opposite of that is Jesus, the lame, limp, desexualized, doesn't have an erection, God form that the Christians start promoting. They get rid of the feminine because she then has suddenly this immaculate conception. So sexuality is removed from the conversation, right? She doesn't have sex, not with her male consort, and produce this healing baby healer child. No, she doesn't have sex, and voila, immaculate conception. And they also add in this piece the propaganda, which is some of the worst, was they said, whenever you go into a new country or a new land, then you'll see the shrines and the ancient places that these people naturally worship. So I'll give you an example. In Ireland and England and Scotland, everywhere that were worship sites of the feminine were rivers, sources, springs, anything to do with water gushing forth life, because it was an exact replica of women gushing forth life. It was sexual. It was all about flow. It was babies coming forth in the wetness of life. And so water springs were the feminine. And what these church elders said is, allow the people to go to the same places that they always have done so that we keep them going, but then just stick a cross on it. Stick a saint on it. And I can see this. I wrote a book called Sacred Journey once, and it's all the sacred sites of Britain and Ireland. And you can see this everywhere you go. It's like you'll see the ancient temples, which are built of stones, and they're like these ancient cairns. And then you just see a cross stuck on it. Or you'll see the goddess Bridie, who was the ancient goddess of the sun and the moon, of fire and water, and a triple form goddess all over Europe and Ireland, Britain and Scotland. And she was the maiden mother crone. And what they did with her shrines was they stuck a cross on it, and they named her Saint Bridget. So whenever you're seeing Saint Bridget, you'll know that that is the goddess, the ancient goddess of the sun, the moon, of triple form goddess, wisdom of women, and of fire and of water. And this was a systematic progression that happened at that time. That's how early it started. Misogynistic, removal of all mention of women. Women were no longer called priestesses. So what you have in the church, in the Christian church, is you have priests, and then women are just nothing, they're congregation. Then you have nuns, because nuns definitely controlled women. Do you know the term, get thee to a nunnery, woman? And this was in the Middle Ages, medieval times, in order to get rid of any women of power, or who had wild spirits, or daughters who didn't want to marry into arranged marriages because they were property. They would be sent to a nunnery for the rest of their life. And they lived a simple life of, in some ways, it was like torture. They would put them in, lock them in. They were never allowed to speak. They could never come out. So that was the get thee to the nunnery option of getting rid of women. The other was even more heinous, legalized, was the Inquisition and the witch hunts. And that happened throughout Europe. And we wonder now why, and I'm going to give you the list of women who are in that category, and men. So who was burned as a witch? And what does the word witch mean? The word witch means wise elder. And the root derivative of the word witch comes from wise or wisdom. And then what the Christians changed it to was wicked, same root. They changed it to wicked. So you've heard that kind of notion of wicked and the devil and all this scaremongering. Okay, top of the list of the wicked, of the witches, was midwives. They would be burned or hanged, depending upon your local area. In Scotland, they were all burned. In Britain, they were all hanged. In Europe, they were burned en masse. And midwives, herbalists, followers of ancient path religions, ugly women, because they had no use whatsoever to men, beautiful women, because they could, with a look, cause him to be impotent. Disabled women, absolutely useless in the community. Women of mental health issues would be called the village idiot, burned, absolutely useless, couldn't be of any use to a man who is they didn't comply to the property, so they were bad property. All women were property. Women with money, let's get rid of them, because, you know, anybody who happened to have money passed down through their family, let's say if there was some all the male heirs had died and it ended up with a woman, let's make her a witch too, because that way men got back the money. And it goes on and on like this. Gay women, because that was unnatural. Then we add in gay men, because that's completely unnatural and abhorrent. Love can only be one way, heterosexual, that's the only way. And then we change the system of birth into men's domain. We take it out of the hands of women and we make it men's domain. And when we do that, further on in history, women were no longer allowed to squat to give birth. I cannot imagine, and I haven't personally given birth this life, but I cannot imagine a more absurd position to be lying on my back with no power of the work of gravity to help me, trying to squeeze out an enormous child through my vagina on my back. I mean, it's freaking ludicrous. And that was because they wanted men to control. Women were strapped down for this at this stage. And men were the only ones who were the gynecologists, the only ones who could actually be in charge of it, because they had to control the birthing process. And all of this sounds terribly, well, you know, when I heard about it at the beginning, when I first understood how men and women, and any men who supported any witches, any women of the ancient past, were also burned and removed too. So powerful men were removed, men with money were removed, disabled men were removed, gay men were removed. It was just a removal. And the church at that point was the most corrupt entity you could possibly imagine. I mean, the Inquisition that we you know, Monty Python makes a joke about the Inquisition are coming kind of thing. But imagine these horrendous sadist type characters, psychopaths, who had any right whatsoever to torture anybody in your community. They would ride in wearing black. And if you even looked the wrong direction, if you even looked the wrong way, you were legally tortured and killed and murdered, and that was part of the church. So how has this impacted us, right? This is pretty grim history, but how has this impacted us? Well, I would say that one of the things that I've really noticed when we're moving towards a new earth awakening, and we're looking at how do systems work that are in harmony with nature, in harmony with the feminine, in harmony with the birthing process, then there is a very different dynamic or power dynamic of how women operate. If men are the impulse force and energy that projects forward, women are the space, the receptive vessel. And within the receptive vessel, how do we work? You know, how do we really move our ideas forward? Well, we invite, we collaborate, we connect, we have conversation, and we invite to participate into a space. And so when you see New Earth business starting to go forward, think about the opportunities that start to take place when it's not you trying to climb just a mountain to get to the top, which is very old patriarchal attitude, like one person at the top, two people can be below, and then mostly the rest of this tribe of the triangle have no power whatsoever. That's the way church, it's the way corporations, it's the way banking systems have been set up. For us to disrupt that, we have to create totally different ways of actioning things. And when you think about the methodology, if you like, or the spiritual system of women themselves. So number one, women are cyclical. we derive all our energy and our power through the cycles of the month. What does month mean? It's attached to the word menstruation. They are inherently part of the same root of words that mean the same thing. So the monthly cycle that takes place, which was the menstrual cycle which takes place, had women operating on a cyclical system. And in fact, the tribes, all the men would follow the same rhythm as the women, because when there's no light affecting you, and we were just under the stars and the sun and the effect of the moon, which was super powerful and still is, it's never changed. It's that rhythm that's underneath everything. Then what happens is you've got women as a group collective menstruating all on the dark of the moon. And so dark of the moon was a time when we would gather in the red tents. That's Native American Indian languaging of it, or indigenous American languaging. They would gather in the red tents. They would divine. They would do divining. They would, you know, the word divining and divine is connected. So we would seek out divine inspiration through divination. And that would be all different ways of looking at the dreams. And then the men gathered around the women to say, what dreams are coming through at the dark of the moon? Because these are guiding the tribe forward. Men were completely part of the same rhythm. And then we get to the other extreme of the cycle, ovulation. When is that taking place? It's taking place at the full moon. And at that time, what you have is party time, because all the lustiness of ovulation, which makes women naturally horny, go out and meet the guys who are they going to co-create and, you know, reproduce with, because that is the urge. It's the natural impulse. So what you see now, the trailing off of natural light means we've got other light forms, which is changing the way our body biometrics work. But we still have this innate rhythm that dark of the moon is a time to go inward. It's a time to collect information. New moon, according to, which is 3 days after dark moon cycle, it's a new cycle. It's a reset. In gardening, ancient almanacs, it's the time to plant new plants. It's the best, most effective time to plant plants if you want a successful harvest. And then full moon is full expansion, full expression. So when I work this into my business cycles, there are times to reflect, step back, times to plant, new, reset, reignite an idea, times to collaborate. Full moon is times to collaborate, times to announce, times to bring in large events, times to expand the energy. But what it isn't is the corporate model of every day is push, 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 no ending, and then you die kind of thing. So you look at how the Industrial Revolution happened, bringing in patriarchal work model. Yes, now we could get everything out to the masses. So it wasn't just some people being super rich. Well, it was actually. Then the industrialists became the super rich. But when you look at the history of it, it starts to be mass production is also the time of corporations. And the energy is you push to the max. The maximum push is seen as rewarded. And what starts to happen is you see corporate America is one of the worst examples. The development of corporate America disavows and diminishes all feminine values of cyclical connection and work and offer and invitations and connections and collaboration and interaction. It completely dismisses it. So an example of that is in 2019, Industrial Revolution starts, I think, late 1700s, something like that, early 1800s. It really goes into something. So we're talking like 200 years later, 300 years later. a woman colleague of mine, when I meet her, is working for some really hardcore coaches in America. And she meets me, she's pregnant, and we just get on like a house on fire, and she wants to come and work with me. And I said to her, so we're looking at, the time ahead, and I said to her, but you can't work during that time because that's when you're giving birth, right? And she's like, no, it's not a problem. It's not a problem. In fact, these female coaches, they too have done it themselves. They're millionaires, but they have this model where you just, if you're on a sales cycle, you break off for 2 weeks, give birth, and then you're back on it 2 weeks later, but to the day. So you have 14 days off. And I was, England isn't quite as hardcore as that, but my jaw dropped open. I was like, well, I'm not okay with that. Like, I'm not cool with that. So I'm not going to let you work for me like that. So how can we do something else? And I said, I'm going to give you 2 months off, not 2 weeks. That's like non-negotiable. I want you to take those 2 months off, and we work around it. And at times like that, I fill in for you. You can lean on me. This is part of the deal. And that's a really effective business. What happens, because the baby we're bringing in is mutual. It's part of our collective consciousness. I'm part of your tribe. I want that baby to thrive too. I want the mother to thrive too, my friend and my colleague. And so, she took this on. And I remember on the second week to the day after she'd given birth, we have a Zoom call. This was the day that she should have been technically back in the full-on sales cycle. Air was all over the place. Her boobs were out. She was leaking milk. She looked like a total mess. And she just came on Zoom, and she just went, oh my God, like, what was I thinking? That this was going to be, the corporate push. And I said, yeah, it's nuts. That is what women in America are being taught to today. And so New Earth Business, let's have a look at how we can alter the way that we operate. So going back to ancient systems, number one, here's a very ancient system. It's one I really stand by. So whether I'm teaching in magical circles and ritual, or whether I'm using it in business, I use the talking stick. This is one that one of the male witches made for me. And think of the male witches as being like tribal elders. And this one, Reno, he is actually very good at carving, and he uses the correct wood. So this is apple wood. And it says on it, speak, hear, hearken to me, respect, silence, talk, listen. And so when we go around as a group, the first thing that we do is everybody is asked to, we have a little social bit, that's the gathering. Same in business, have a little gathering where everybody lets off steam, and then we hand out the talking stick. And it's like when you hold the talking stick in a circle, everything is circular, everything is feminine, it's bringing in the new ideas of invitation. The rules of the talking stick are you listen. And anybody who is speaking, everybody has an opportunity to speak. And there may be the more extrovert types who, they're the ones who usually talk a lot. By holding a stick or by having the floor for a certain period of time, they also will come to a natural ending quicker because everybody's listening to them. And often extroverts, the reason they take over is because they're not experiencing being listened to. It may then be passed on. And when it's passed on, when they're finished, in magical circles or ritual circles, you might say, blessed be, or aho, or haush haush, depending upon which tribal background you're working with. In business, we just say thank you. And nobody interrupts. Nobody is able to, even if you agree with somebody, you're going, yeah, I love that idea. Great, blah, blah, blah. You don't say that. You just listen. Then they pass it on. We all say, thank you. Next person speaks. And if it happens to be a quiet person, that will give them the opportunity to really be able to speak into space and be heard. And it goes around until everybody is heard. And then we have an understanding of where everybody is. So my meetings are all run like that. That's New Earth, and it's Ancient Earth. Stephen Covey Sr., who is the guy who wrote the seven successful habits of highly successful people, that book. He actually used the talking stick in negotiations with peace at top political levels. His later work, because he has passed over now, was to try and create peace on the planet. And he took that to politicians, and he took it to the Middle East to try and have talks between the Jews and the Arabs during some of the worst conflict times. And they had to listen to one another. And believe me, in listening, there's a very, very different outcome than if people are just squabbling. I mean, if you heard the British Parliament, it's appalling. It's just a bunch of mostly men screaming at each other, screaming louder at each other. And that's considered to be, like running one of the most powerful nations of the world. It's insane. So we bring in things like listening. I operate very much my businesses on collaboration. So the idea is that currently right now, I'm working very much on large digital events. And so I bring in the tech package as well. So ancient wisdom meets tech. So let's say that this event that I'm on right now and I'm speaking on, which happens to be Samantha Briatico's event, Birthing in the New Earth, I also then pitch her forward to any other events that I'm working on that I think she would be a natural fit for. So it never ends. Like I'm recommending her, if it's appropriate, to other events. She is listening to me. She is recommending me to anybody who she hears about who could use my services, say they want to create a large digital online event. She would probably quite naturally say, oh, have you heard of Sally? Have you heard of Sally's services? And the networking potential that we do amongst, in the feminine way, it is not restricted to women at all. I do exactly the same with my male clients, my men. I love my men too. In the same way, it's a recommendation. I pitch them forward for ideas. We collaborate. So here's the difference with a New Earth event. You no longer have to be an extrovert, somebody who's just a natural at public speaking, somebody who's got that kind of potent, like out there kind of energy, standing on a podium or a stage. You can actually be quite an introvert, because the operation method or the system is collaborative. So look at the way that events are going to take place now in New Earth, and they're rapidly going to, you need to, if you want to be in your field, step forward into New Earth events, because the way it works now, imagine in 2020, 100% of events went down due to COVID. Like 100% of events. That means that all of those organizers and those people who have been very effective over many years to build their presence in the physical, those physical events will have cost a frickin' fortune, like Glastonbury Music Festival with 350,000 attendees costs a fortune to build. Think about the issues that are being dealt with now. Glastonbury's cancelled. All the monies that have already been paid to artists, to people who are part of the experience of building that festival, which is enormous, they suddenly have no income. Boom. They also have a real issue with tickets. Like, do you refund them because then you lose all your money? Or do you try and defer some people to the next date? So what they'll be launched into is total crisis, right? Total emergency measure crisis. And in the wake of that, all the big boys and girls have gone down because they're dealing with emergencies. That leaves an open space for any of you who feel that you've got a really important thing to say and bring out into New Earth, new topic, all the ways that you're working right now, and you want a platform. Think about it this way, that if you are able to gather together colleagues, other people who speak around the edges of your topic, you've got the topic here, that's yours, right in the center, but all around you, you've got collaborators, people who speak around the edges of the topics. You bring them into being. What do they get? They get visibility. And then when you give them something, you give them the opportunity to connect with a much larger audience, because you're handling the traffic that's coming to a very big event now with data protection that went into effect in 2019. You cannot sell lists, list building. You can't just give it to people to have a list. So what the offer is there in collaboration is you say anybody who attends your event can have all of the email list of everybody who came, and you can send them an offer, and it could be a free offer. That's marketing. All of a sudden you've made connection to a whole new tribe. You've got visibility in a wider spread audience that you would never normally be part of. And the effectiveness of this, it may not be immediately quick in the same way, but how it works again is go back to the cyclical model. It works like cycles in the day. After an event has happened and you've been seen, you've had a new conversation, you've had an offer, you've sent out to a new group of people, somebody might start to connect in with you, want to have a one-to-one. So you make yourself available. Again, spaciousness. They come into the space, they have conversations. When it's appropriate for them, they will then book further on in the year to do an event themselves. This is my particular kind of business, but you can see how it works on a New Earth model. It's win, 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 win. Everybody wins. It's not 1% at the top that gets all the benefit and then all the other people don't get anything. It's like everybody gets something in the process. It's sustainable. So when I'm creating events now, there's zero waste involved. It's global. We're speaking to the globe as a village now. Your audience, if you worked in a tiny local area, like one of the clients that I work with, Diana Luna Sampson, who is a wonderful yoga teacher, and she does lunar rhythms yoga. So yoga according to the phases of the moon. So you do different styles of yoga according to the time of the moon. So she's a real priestess, and she is literally a priestess as well. And she works her yoga in that way. Where she lives in England is a very small place. And initially when she was working with me 3 years ago, she had a very small community of followers. And I always said to her, you need to go global. You need to go global, digital, large events. And that's exactly what's happened this year. When she's experienced COVID, the first thing she did, or I suggested, like, get yourself onto a global platform now and let's start working you on a global level. And that's exactly what's happened. In the first run of her event, she got 1,000 new contacts. So, imagine that 1,000 new contacts that you've never had before, that you can sell to, who are global, who want what you have, who love what you do. So there's no painful marketing in there. And you just start creating and building a very different audience. And that is New Earth business. There are so many things that I could say about it and, apply to your particular business. I'm a spiritual business coach, so everything I do has a spiritual backdrop, the way that I operate. And it's exciting times now, like really exciting. This is not a time when we need to think, all the struggles of, old order going down. There will be some ugly bits. The earth is birthing itself. We need to pay attention to the animals, to the people, to the way we eat, to the way we farm, to the way that we do business with one another, so that everybody gets a life that is amazing. Everybody gets fed, everybody gets water, everybody gets shelter. And we don't just see the earth and the feminine concept as something, as property and as something to use. And so I'm personally really excited about this time. And I think I'd like to end with a beautiful image of New Earth. You know, this is the earth. This is us. We're able to work at the level of frequency, like ancient crystals, vibrating, all with different colors, all connecting, all powerful. And it's a very different, some are big, some are small, some are all over the place, you know, but it's not the triangle of old order where just the 1% get something and everybody else gets a kind of half-life. This is a different model. And anybody who wants to speak to me in future, you can connect with me. I have two companies. One is called, no surprise, the New Earth Visionaries. I work very much with media training and creating visionary ads, which is part of the branding work I do. I'm a branding expert, but I work with, rather than the message being, hey, what's your product and how can I sell it to you? It's more like, what's the vision behind the service or the offer that you have? Who is the visionary behind it? And that level of connection, that's New Earth. That's the way that we want to know about it. Who's behind the business. What are their ethics? What are their morals? What are their stance on plastic? So New Earth Visionaries, and you can find me at millionaireyogi.guru, and I'll spell that. Millionaire, you understand that one, yogi, Y-O-G-I, .guru, G-U-R-U. And you can find me on Instagram and on Facebook under that name. My name is Sally Griffin. You can see it in the corner, so you know how to spell it. And anything you want to know about, you know, things that I'm doing, the events I'm helping people with, if you think you'd be a good speaker, you want to be part of some of the events that I do, please feel free to contact me. You can get a hold of me at sally@millionaireyogi.guru. And wishing you so much love, so much passion in this New Earth. We're going to just have a blast. Namaste. So much love.